Now, the ARB, after conducting, Madam Secretary, more than 100 interviews, identified specific employee and a specific employee at the State Department who denied these requests. It was Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Bureau of Diplomatic Security, Charlene Lamb, and again, she did come before the Oversight Committee. The ARB report was very critical of her. It was also critical of her two supervisors, Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary and the Assistant Secretary for Diplomatic Security. The Oversight Committee found the same answer as the ARB. It found that this official denied these requests, and it found no evidence that you approved or denied them. The problem is that Republicans just keep asking the same question over and over again and pretend they don't know the answer. In 2013, the Republican chairman of 5 House committees issued a report falsely accusing you personally of denying these requests in a cable over your signature. The next day, the chairman of the Oversight Committee, Darrell Issa, went on national television and accused you of the same thing. Can we play that clip, please?
Secretary of State was just wrong. She said she did not participate in this, and yet only a few months before the attack, she outright denied security in her signature in a cable, April 2012.
Do you remember that allegation, Madam Secretary?
I do.
Well, when the Washington Post fact checker examined this claim, they gave it 4 Pinocchios. They called it a whopper. It turns out that the Republicans had a copy of that cable, but they didn't tell the American people that your so-called signature was just a stamp that appeared on millions of cables from the State Department every single year. Is that right?
That's correct.
Now, Madam Secretary, my goal has always been to gather facts and to defend the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth. Last year, I asked our staff to compile an asked and answered database, and this specific issue was answered thoroughly. On Monday, we put out another report, and this issue was addressed yet again. But the Republicans want to keep this attack going, so they are now trying to argue that we have new emails that raise new questions. The truth is that we have reviewed these emails, and they don't contradict the previous conclusions. They confirm them. They corroborate them. We've reviewed emails from Ambassador Stevens, and they show that he asked Charlene Lamb for more security. Nothing we have obtained, not the new interviews or the new emails, changes the basic facts we have known for 3 years. Secretary Clinton, let me ask one final question, and please take as much time as you want to answer this. There's no evidence to support the Republican claims that you personally rejected security requests. So some have argued that since you knew the danger was increasing in Libya, you should have been in there making detailed decisions about whether there should be 5, 7, or even 9 security officers at any given post. Madam Secretary, I know you have answered over again. You might want to just elaborate and just, I have a minute and 7 seconds.
Well, thank you, Congressman. I think there has been some confusion, and I welcome the opportunity to try to clarify it to the best of my ability. With respect, as you rightly point out, the claims that were made about the cables, I think you have explained the fact, which is that it's the long-standing tradition of the State Department for cables from around the world to be sent to and sent from the State Department under the signature, over the signature of the Secretary of State. It's a stamp. It's just part of the tradition. There are millions of them, as you point out. They are sorted through and directed to the appropriate personnel. Very few of them ever come to my attention. None of them with respect to security regarding Benghazi did. Then the other point, which I thank you for raising so that perhaps I can speak to this one as well. There is, of course, information that we were obtaining about the increasingly dangerous environment in Libya, across the country, but in particular in eastern Libya. And we were aware of that, and we were certainly taking that into account. There was no actionable intelligence on September 11th, or even before that date, about any kind of planned attack on our compound in Benghazi. And there were a lot of debates, apparently, that went on within the security professionals about what to provide, because they did have to prioritize. The Accountability Review Board pointed that out. The State Department has historically, and certainly before this terrible incident, not had the amount of money that we thought would be necessary to do what was required to protect everyone. So of course there had to be priorities, and that was something that the security professionals dealt with. I think that both Admiral Mullen and Ambassador Pickering made it very clear that they thought that the high threat post should move to a higher level of scrutiny, and we had immediately moved to do that.
Thank you.
Thank the gentleman. The chair would now recognize the gentlelady from Indiana, Ms. Brooks.
Good morning, Secretary Clinton.
Morning.
Thank you for being here today. In drawing on what you just said, that very few, but no requests for Benghazi came to your attention, I'd like to show you something. This pile represents the emails that you sent or received about Libya in 2011, from February through December of 2011. This pile represents the emails you sent or received from early 2012 until the day of the attack. There are 795 emails in this pile. We've counted them. There are 67 emails in this pile in 2012. And I'm troubled by what I see here. And so my questions relate to these piles. In this pile in 2011, I see daily updates, sometimes hourly updates, from your staff about Benghazi and Chris Stevens. When I look at this pile, in 2012, I only see a handful of emails to you from your senior staff about Benghazi, and I have several questions for you about this disparity, because we know from talking to your senior advisors that they knew, and many of them are here today, seated behind you, they knew to send you important information, issues that were of importance to you, and I can only conclude by your own records that there was a lack of interest in Libya in 2012. So let's first focus, though, on this pile and what was happening in Libya in 2011. We had an ambassador to Libya, Ambassador Kretz, but you've told us that, and you told us in your opening, you handpicked Chris Stevens to be your special representative in Benghazi, and you sent him there. And by your own emails, most have provided last February, a few provided just a few weeks ago, they show that in March of 11, so we're in March of 11, you had Chris Stevens join you in Paris, where you were meeting with the leader of the Libyan revolution. And after Paris, that is when, as you talked about, Chris Stevens went into Benghazi, I believe in April 5th of 2011, on that Greek cargo ship. How long was he expected to stay? What were Chris Stevens' orders from you about Libya and about Benghazi specifically?
Chris Stevens was asked to go to Benghazi to do reconnaissance, to try to figure out who were the leaders of the insurgency who were based in Benghazi, what their goals were, what they understood would happen if they were successful. It was, as I said, the hard-nosed 21st century diplomacy that is rooted in the old-fashioned necessary work of building relationships and gathering information.
How long was he anticipated to stay in Benghazi? Do you recall?
It was open-ended. We were, in discussing it with him, unsure as to how productive it would be, whether it would be appropriate for him to stay for a long time or a short time. That was very much going to depend upon Chris's own assessment. We knew we were sending someone who understood the area, who understood the language, who understood a lot of the personalities because of the historical study that he used to love to do, and we were going to be guided by what he decided.
I'd like to draw your attention to an email. It's an email found at tab 1. It's an Ops Center email that was forwarded to you from Huma Abedin on Sunday, March 27th, that says at the bottom of the email, so the current game plan is for Mr. Stevens to move no later Wednesday from Malta to Benghazi, but the bottom of the email says the goal of this one-day trip is for him to lay the groundwork for a stay of up to 30 days. So just to refresh that recollection, I believe initially the goal was to go in for 30 days. Were you personally briefed on his security plan prior to him going into Libya? Because
yes,
at that time, if I'm not mistaken, I'm sorry to interrupt, Gaddafi's forces were still battling the rebels, correct?
Right. That's right.
And so were you personally briefed before you sent Mr. Stevens into Benghazi?
I was personally told by the officials who were in the State Department, who were immediately above Chris, who were making the plans for him to go in, that it was going to be expeditionary diplomacy. It was going to require him to make a lot of judgments on the ground about what he could accomplish, and including where it would be safe for him to be and how long for him to stay. And I think the initial decision was, up to 30 days and reassess, but it could have been 10 days, it could have been 60 days, depending upon what he found and what he reported back to us.
And possibly what was determined about the danger of Benghazi. Who were those officials, Secretary?
Well, there were a number of officials who were working.
That were advising you on the security specifically.
Well, with respect to the security, this was a particular concern of the Assistant Secretary for the Bureau in which Chris worked.
And I'm sorry, what was that person's name?
Assistant Secretary Jeff Feldman.
Thank you.
And it was also a concern of the Assistant Secretary for Diplomatic Security, as well as other officials within the State Department. And I think it's fair to say, Congresswoman, this was, we all knew, a risky undertaking. And it was something that was, as I said in my opening statement, more reminiscent of the way diplomacy was practiced back in the 19th century, because we didn't have the internet. We didn't have instantaneous communications. You would send diplomats and envoys into places and not hear from them for maybe months. This was obviously not of that kind, but it was not that different in degree from what we had done before, and it was a risky undertaking and one which Chris volunteered for and was anxious to undertake.
And it was so risky, I'd like to pull up another email from the Ops Center that was forwarded to you from Ms. Abedin on Sunday, April 10th. So he had been there about 5 days, and it indicates that the situation in Ajdabiya had worsened to the point where Stevens is considering departing from Benghazi. This is within 5 days of him going in. Were you aware of that concern within the first 5 days that he had gone in?
Yeah.
And did anyone share that with you? And
Yes.
who did share that with you?
We were aware because we were really counting on Chris to guide us and give us the information from the ground. We had no other sources. There was no American outpost. There was no, American military presence. Eventually, other Americans representing different agencies were able to get into Benghazi and begin to do the same work, but they, of course, couldn't do that work overtly, which is why we wanted a diplomat who could be publicly meeting with people to try to get the best assessment. But it was always going to be a constant risk, and we knew that.